Hey everyone, and welcome back to the 7-Stage Law School Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Baska, 7-Stage Admissions Consultant, blogger, and podcaster, and we're recording this right around the new year, which tends to mark the halfway point of file reading season. Admissions officers really got down to the business of reading applications around November 1st, and they've really been going hardcore at that for the last 2 months, and they're going to keep going hardcore on that for about another 2 months. At that point, around March 1st or so, they're going to pivot into recruitment mode as they welcome admitted students to campus for various visits, open houses, and events like that. And we also hope that many of you all who are tuning in are planning those trips right now. But this is also the time of year when we get one of the most useful and data-rich documents that ever gets published for law school admissions, the ABA 509 reports. We're going to take the opportunity in this week's episode to break those documents down, explain how you can use them for your own planning and strategizing, and maybe even take advantage of the new video formatting that we have here to show you something more than just a talking head. So unless you're listening to us on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, or one of our other streaming platforms, in that case, check out the video version, and don't worry, we're going to paint a picture for you with our words. Okay, so you aren't going to be left out. Don't worry about it. But now with that said, so step one, what are these reports? And what they are is that every law school has to publish certain or maintain certain rules put forth by the American Bar Association. And this is so that you can be accredited by the ABA, which allows your graduates to sit for bar exams down the road. And the ABA has all kinds of rules. I'm going to screen share with you guys through the magic of technology. The ABA publishes all kinds of standards that law schools have to hold. And there are chapters on the organization and administration of the law school, the different programs, the faculty, but there's an entire chapter on admissions and student services. Now, these are called ABA 509 reports because if we scroll down to standard 509, you'll see that every school is required to publish certain standardized information on their website regarding things like admissions data, tuition and fees, living costs, financial aid, so on and so forth. And actually, this information has to be prominently featured on a school's website. So to that end, I asked our producer to give me, before we started recording, I asked him, name me a random law school. And the random school that he mentioned was Emory Law. Fantastic school. Really a great option for anyone, especially who's looking to practice in Atlanta or in Georgia. But also, I mean, it has so much going for it. Beautiful area of Atlanta. And now I'm just going to scroll through their website to see if they have their 509 information, their 509 information prominently featured. Aha, here it is. Consumer information, ABA required disclosures. In compliance with ABA Standard 509, we've compiled key information drawn from our latest annual questionnaire submission, and they have their reports from the last couple of years. Perfect. Now, we can quibble as to whether or not this is prominent or not, but, it was at the bottom of their website if we go back a page. And most schools are going to have this listed as consumer information, ABA required disclosures, ABA 509 report, and typically at the bottom of their page. Okay, but the actual best place to look for this information is on the ABA's website. So for our listeners who are tuning in on streaming services, what you can do, the best way to find this website is to just do a quick Google search for ABA 509 reports. For those of you who are tuning in on the video component, we'll put a link into the episode description and on our socials. And what's cool here is that not only can you look at reports from the last 15 years, you can also pull up every ABA accredited law school in the United States of America, any and all of them. And additionally, if you're an Excel person like I am, you can pull up master data for every law school in the country. So for example, if you wanted to check out grants and scholarships and just have everyone's information in one place at one time, boom, you could do that right there. So in practical terms, why do we have this? In years past, schools were perhaps not the most forthcoming with publicizing basic consumer information. So this really came to a head in the 2000s when there was some confusion on law school enrollment stats from various schools. We'll just leave it at that politely because we don't want to name names. It was a whole thing. You can do a Google search for that, and that's a story for another day. Okay, so there was a push in the late 2000s to have more standardized information that was cleared by LSAC and by the American Bar Association and published by every law school. But also in practical terms, it can be really hard for consumers, you, applicants, to find the same information about every school either on their website or in the brochure that you may pick up at a law fair. Even some basic information like, hey, how many students did you enroll in last year's first year class? What was the LSAT median? What was the GPA median? Some schools have that really readily available on their homepage. Some have it readily available on their the front page of the admissions website. Other schools, you really have to dig for this information. So in this case, you know that every school's ABA 509 report will have the same information in the same place on these documents. And now, again, where can you find them? Either on their websites, or you can do that Google search for ABA 509 report and pull up that master page. But now, here's the actual fun of them. What can you use them for? So let me open up for you the 509 report from this year for Michigan. Okay, so this is what a 509 report looks like. And this is for Michigan 2025. I should note that this is measuring information for this year's enrollment, meaning what did things look like at Michigan on October 5th, 2025. The ABA provides that as the lock-in day every year because there are some law schools whose academic year begins in August. There are others whose academic year may begin after Labor Day. And then there's usually a little bit of dust settling, especially with returning students. So is the student who took a leave of absence coming back, or are they staying away for another semester or another year? So the ABA provides a little grace period for that, October 5th, which also typically aligns with most schools' fall breaks or just before that. Now here on the upper right corner of the first page, we see the key admissions information, completed applications, offers of admission, how many students enrolled from the applicant pool. So in addition, how many people were enrolled, but they had actually been admitted in a previous year. So these are students who typically were admitted, but then had something else pop up, a medical issue, a family issue, a unique work opportunity, post-grad fellowship, something like that. So in Michigan's case, they enrolled 343 people in the first year class. 329 of them came from last year's applicant pool. 14 of them were deferred from the previous year. And that's out of 770 offers of admission and roughly 9,000 applicants. And then here we have the median GPA, 75th and 25th percentile GPAs. We also have the same breakdown for the LSAT. Now, a kind of a cool thing to file away here, we also have this stat for people who were not included in the UGPA calculation, meaning so our GPA median in the case of Michigan was a 388, and that is theoretically not out of 343 students. It is actually out of 337. There were 6 1Ls at Michigan this year who did not have a reportable GPA. Who are these people? These are people who did not attend a college in the United States or Canada for their first bachelor's degree. They could be American citizens who went to Oxford or Cambridge. They could be Korean citizens who attended Korea University, Seoul National University, Yonsei in Korea. But there are 6 enrollees who didn't have a reportable GPA. And now here for the LSAT, we would also see, and we're going to see this in a little bit, if there were other people who enrolled who took the GRE or who were admitted through other alternate testing methods, we would kind of see that right here. Okay. But anyway, front page, right-hand column, that's where you're going to see the admissions information. On the left side, we're going to see 1L tuition and fees. And this provides you with a really clean and easy way to see the lock, stock, and barrel costs, at least for this year, at various schools. That can be really challenging to find on schools' websites because sometimes it's on the admissions page, sometimes it's on the financial aid page, sometimes it's not even on the law school's page, it's on the Central University financial aid page. Okay. And again, I'm using Michigan here because they're a pretty standard, easy school to present. Okay. But now we're going to show you some variations. Okay. So here's a variation to share with you guys. right? So I just mentioned on Michigan's page, or Michigan's 509 report, they're a pretty straightforward school. Harvard is also a straightforward school, but you're immediately going to notice some differences here, especially if you have a keen eye. So, for example, how many incoming 1Ls were not included in the UGPA calculation? They had 10 out of 579. Okay, that's pretty similar. But now, if we look closely here, one thing that stands out to me is this number of enrollees who deferred admission from a previous year. 96 out of an enrolling class of 579. That's a pretty big percentage of the class who deferred. Were there that many students who had health issues, got a post-grad fellowship, had a promotion at work? No. Some of those 96 had that pop up, but this is where we see the Harvard Junior Deferral Program in action. Okay, they have a very large number of deferred, or I would call them postponed matrics, students who postpone their matriculation into law school because of the size and breadth of the JDP program. Additionally, if we scroll down, we see a lot of students, more than Michigan certainly, who had 0, who enrolled with the GRE. And we see the GRE percentile breakdowns, the medians, as well as the 75th percentiles for each section of the GRE. So immediately, this is a little bit different. And now, let's take a look at BYU. So now, what's the interesting thing for BYU? Okay, a couple things. First is, we will see that their enrollment rate from offers of admission is extraordinarily high, 81%. Okay, so 81% of the people admitted by BYU Law accepted that offer of admission. By comparison, if you had eagle eyes on the Harvard report, you would have noticed that their enrollment rate from offers of admission was 59%. For Michigan, just going to double check that stat, it was 42%. So BYU's at 81%. What does that tell us? I mean, it tells us that there's a chicken and the egg situation happening. Either people are very deliberate when they apply to BYU. People are not just applying to BYU Law for no good reason. They're applying because they are really, really interested, and if made an offer of admission, they're very likely to accept that. That's the chicken. The egg here may be the BYU Law Admissions Office is only admitting people who they are very confident will accept that offer of admission. Okay, so in this case, we can put actual numbers here. They admitted 148 people, and of those 148, 120 of them enrolled. But now we have a little bit of a twist here. Okay, if we scroll down, of those 120 enrollees, only 80 of them took the LSAT. Okay, so then you may be thinking, okay, I guess they have a lot of GRE admits and enrollees. They only had 1. So who else were they enrolling? They enrolled 41 students with no LSAT, GRE, or JD Next, which is an additional admissions test offered by LSAC. But what BYU does, they have a not a 3+3 program, but a program that will guarantee admission to rising seniors who attend BYU, who have a GPA over a certain threshold, and then they do not need to take the LSAT. The ABA allows this in Standard 503. If you go check out your ABA standards, they allow you to enroll up to 10% of your incoming class with no LSAT if they meet certain statistical parameters and if they attend your school for undergrad. And the reason I pulled up BYU is because they have one of the biggest percentages of students of their enrolling class who come through that program. And this is one reason why I think they've been able to really boost their stats over the last couple of years. So their incoming median for the LSAT was a 170. It's easier to achieve a high median with a smaller number than with a larger number. So could they have had a 170 median LSAT with 122 LSATs in their enrolling class? Maybe, maybe not, but only having 80 LSATs in their enrolling class made that job a lot easier. And I will also note, too, another reason why I wanted to pull up BYU is because they have one of the lowest tuition rates of any school in the country. So, again, as you're comparing these numbers, we see $31,984 for non-resident tuition fees at BYU. By comparison, for Michigan, that number was $79,108. So this would be an easy way for you to compare apples to apples on tuition rates. And so now that's useful information just on the first page of this report. But wait, there's more. So if we keep scrolling, we're going to see, and I'm going to go back to Michigan's 509 report from this year. But if we scroll down to the second page, we see information on curricular offerings, the number of classes, number of full-time faculty and part-time faculty, number of degrees awarded. We also see a breakdown of grants and scholarships. We're going to come back to this in a minute. But for right now, we want to keep scrolling to a table that's called JD enrollment. And this shows a breakdown of the entire law school by class. We have our 1Ls, which are listed as JD1. We have our 2Ls as JD2. We have our 3Ls as JD3. We also have JD4. Who would these people be? Dual degree candidates. So maybe a school has a 4-year joint JD MBA, for example. Okay. And then in each class, so in the 1L class, for example, we have this broken down by gender, male, female, prefer not to disclose, and we have a total number. And then we also have this broken down by race. So Hispanic, Native American, Asian American, Black, Native Hawaiian, multiracial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So what you can do is you can take a quick look and see, like, hey, if I'm a student of color and I want to go to a school that has a good community, as far as numbers go, like, am I going to be the only student there? Are there a solid number of students? What are the general trends that we see? You can go to the second or third page of every school's 509, and you can check that out. Additionally, on that variation, you'll notice down here, since 2024, U.S. non-resident is no longer a separate category. Okay, so we can't tell from this report who is an international citizen or not. Before 2024, and I'm going to show you Michigan's report from 2023, U.S. non-citizens were a completely separate category. So let me share that screen window. Okay, so here's Michigan's 2023 report. You'll see we see the same admissions information and tuition information in a lot of places. We're going to scroll down. And here on the second page, we see that breakdown for enrollment. And here we see a whole row for U.S. non-resident. So in the case of Michigan, they, in that year's 1L class, enrolled 4 non-U.S. citizens. In the 2L class, 8. In the 3L class, 5. And the reason why I wanted to point out Michigan here is that these numbers are really low for a school of Michigan's caliber. My assessment of this, when I'm working with clients, has always been, I've looked at this information and said, if you are not a U.S. citizen, I don't know if Michigan's the best place to apply to, because my logical assumption is, given the quality of Michigan, given the prestige of Michigan law, if they were admitting a lot of international students in a class to enroll a class of 306 1Ls, we would surely see more than 4 internationals. And the same deal for the 2L class. When they enrolled 347 of them, we surely would have seen more than 8. And additionally, we scroll up to the top here. How many of their enrollees did not have a GPA? Only 4. Okay, so I interpret these two pieces of information as basically saying, hey, if you're that Korean citizen, if you're that Chinese citizen, I would only apply to Michigan law if you had really, really, really specific reasons for wanting to attend. And we see similar information for other schools. So for example, if we check out UVA's report from 2023, okay, so here is UVA's report from 2023. And get on the first page with this admissions information right away. How many people were not included in the GPA calculations? Only 1. So there was only 1 student in the enrolling class of 305 in 2023 who didn't have a GPA. And that could either be, again, that American who went to a university abroad, or it could be that foreign national who received their education abroad. And then if we scroll down to the table of enrollment by class and by gender and by race, for U.S. non-resident, in the 1L class that year, 305 1Ls, there were 4 non-citizens. 2L class, 310, we see 9 non-citizens. The 3L class, 296 students, 3 non-citizens. So again, my advice and my takeaway for my clients has always been, hey, Michigan, UVA, there are a couple schools where we see these low numbers. It's you may just want to file this way. Now, by comparison, it's not that way for every school by any stretch of the imagination. So let's go over to Columbia's 509 report, for example. Okay, so here's Columbia's 509 report from 2023. We're going to expand it out. We see that they had 363 enrollees. Okay, and actually, we also see they had 415 enrollees. 52 of them came from somewhere other than the applicant pool. Just to give you guys an insight here, some of them may be the Columbia Junior Deferral Program folks, but also there are years when law schools over-enroll. They, or not over-enroll, they over-deposit, meaning we as enrollment management professionals within the admissions field, we know typically if I'm Columbia and I get 7,800 applications in a year, usually I need to admit about 900 to 1,000 of those people to enroll my preferred class of about 401Ls. But we know there are natural fluctuations here. Sometimes we hit that number on the nose. Sometimes things are a little low, in which case we enroll students off the wait list. On the flip side, sometimes that number is high, okay? And more people accept your offer of admission than you expect. And you then ask them politely if they wouldn't mind deferring their enrollment by a year. And sometimes schools may increase scholarship in order to entice folks to enroll in the next year's class instead. And I believe this is one of those years when Columbia had a slightly over-deposited class from the year before. So there were people who were asked politely to go into the next enrolling class. But again, but germane to what we're talking about right now, if I was advising people, international applicants, on whether or not Columbia was somewhere that would be open to their enrollment, right away we see there were 28 people that they enrolled who were not involved in the GPA calculations. So or about 5% of the class that year, okay, received their degree outside the States or Canada. And if we scroll down to the enrollment by class, we see that in the 1L class of 418 people, 77 of them were not U.S. citizens. In the 2L class of 470, there were 101 non-citizens. So a pretty healthy percentage each year, in the ballpark of 5-ish to 7-8-ish%, depending on the year. So what this signals to me is Columbia has historically been a bit more open to considering applications from folks from outside the states and who receive their education outside the states and Canada. This can also, I admit, be a bit of a chicken and the egg too. Because, for example, is it that Columbia has been more open to these candidates, or has it been the reality that Columbia is also a really attractive law school for a lot of these candidates, given not only the quality of the Columbia law education, the prestige of Columbia law, but also the reality that Columbia law is located in New York City, a great place to live if you are from outside the States or Canada because of all the different communities based in New York City. Also, transportation purposes, it's a heck of a lot easier to get from different places around the world to New York City than it is to get to Ann Arbor or to get to Charlottesville, for instance. But still, when advising clients, I point to Columbia and say, hey, historically, they've been really open to enrolling students from a lot of different places. Especially, we noticed the difference between the number of U.S. non-citizens in that 1L class, 77. And if we scroll back up, again, there were 28 people who enrolled who didn't have a GPA. What that means is that those remaining non-U.S. citizens, that gap of 49, those were U.S. non-residents, non-citizens who attended college in the States. So they're already here, and Columbia was more than happy for them to continue their stay here in the States. Okay, so those were things that we can find on the first two pages. But wait, there's even more, guys. So if we keep scrolling, we keep finding more and more really, really useful information. So now I'm going to share George Washington's 509 report from this year. And if we scroll down, we'll see, starting on the first page, we see the admissions information, very much like we've seen on other schools reports. We scroll down to the third page, we see the breakdown by class and by race and by gender. Keep going, keep going. And now here on the fifth page, we see some information about transfers. How many people transferred out of George Washington Law School? How many people transferred in? And the quartile GPA breakdowns for the transfers in. So in this case, we see 33 students, 33 1Ls from the previous George Washington 1L class transferred out. 46 people transferred into the 2L class, and the median GPA for those folks was a 3.41 GPA. And then on the right side of that page, we see a breakdown of the schools where those transfers came from and how many of them. So, for example, of those 46 people who transferred in, 15 of them came from American University School of Law, or I think technically College of Law. But also we see a good variation in the schools that folks came from. Okay, so this indicates to me, I'm going to tell you this right away, this is a lot of folks who transfer in. George Washington is one of the biggest schools for transfers in. You may also say, wait a second, but 33 people also transferred out. Is that a red flag? Yes and no, okay, because consider, hey, George Washington just brought in those 15 from American, okay? And now let's pivot to looking at Georgetown's same report, okay? Their 509 report, and we'll scroll down to their transfers. Right here. They brought in 120 transfers into the 2L class, median GPA of a 373, and where did those folks come from? 29 of them came from American, and then ding, 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 11 of them came from George Washington, okay? So just consider the Washington, D.C. law school market, where you have a number of really great law schools, but there is like a rankings pecking order. You know what I mean? So in this case, we see the top students at 2 of those D.C. schools moving up in the rankings pecking order. Also, what can we take away from the fact there's so many transfers in, but only 1 transfer out? Because conceptually, you all may be thinking, schools only bring in transfers to fill the seats of people who've left, right? Or who are taking a break in their studies, maybe because they're, medical issue or, taking a leave of absence or something like that. So roughly we would see 1 in for 1 out, more or less. Kind of like we saw with George Washington, where it was 46 in, 33 or so out. It's a net gain of 13, so more coming in than going out, but, it's not too wonky. A net of 119, though, what's the deal? So we can't conclude anything with purpose, but what this tells me is that Georgetown believes that they have open seats available in the class. They have the capacity to have more students in the 1L class, but they choose not to. Now, why may they not choose that? Well, to put the most positive spin on things, maybe they're looking at this as, hey, we're in a position where we can then fill that 1L class a year later with the best and brightest from around the country. Look at where all these people came from, and look at all the different experiences they're going to bring with them to our community, and that will really enrich the community. It really could be that. It could also be that if we scroll up to their admissions information, their stats, they enroll one of the biggest classes of any law school, 594 full-time 1Ls. So they may have the capacity to enroll 700 1Ls every year, but they are making a strategic decision not to, because they can enroll a class of 600 with an LSAT of a 171 and a GPA of a 394. Could they enroll those same stats? Could they have those same medians for a class of 700? Probably not. Okay. In addition, there may be a tuition purpose for this. So if we scroll down to their scholarship information, and we're going to break this down a little bit more in a moment, we see that Georgetown, they give a solid amount of scholarships. So 61% of the students are receiving some form of scholarship. 35% are receiving somewhere between 0 and half tuition. 23% half to full tuition. That's pretty good. With a 50% grant amount of $35,000 per year. Typically, scholarship is allocated for helping to enroll the 1L class. There's usually not a scholarship budget given to law schools to help enroll incoming transfer students. So Georgetown may also be looking at this not only as, heck, we could enroll 700, but we wouldn't have stats as high. They could also be looking at this as, and we don't have the scholarship budget to do that. So instead, we can bring them in as transfer students, as 2Ls. 120 of them. And again, they've already proven themselves. So these are known commodities because they've already done really well at another law school, and they have 1 year under their belts to more clearly be able to get a sense of what they want to achieve out of law school. So they're going to hit the ground running once they get here. Okay, everyone. And speaking of money, let's take a closer look at that field. Okay, so I'm going to share Notre Dame's 509 report with you because I used to be the director of admissions at Notre Dame Law School. I'm still very familiar with how they operate over there because it's a lot of the things that I used to do. I'm not saying that in a haughty way, by the way. Just, the wheel wasn't broken, so why remake it, right? So if we scroll to the grants and scholarship information for Notre Dame, bottom of the second page, we see that they provide scholarship to about 92% of their students. Of that, 54% are scholarships that are between 1% and 50% tuition, 31% half to full tuition, and then a very small number of students who are receiving full tuition or more than full tuition, just 6% of the total enrolling students, and that the 50th percentile grants amount was $30,000 per year. I can tell you again, from my experience, the powers that be at Notre Dame do want to use scholarship to enroll the best class possible, but also they want to recognize, hey, we want to be a financially prudent school as well. We want to be able to pay our bills. We want to contribute tuition revenue to this broader university. And we're really going to try to balance these two competing factors. Okay. Now, meanwhile, let me share WashU and St. Louis Law School's report with you. We're scrolling down to their scholarship information, and right away the numbers pop out at you. So now versus Notre Dame was 92% of students are receiving scholarship. Here it's 94. Very similar. So Jake, why are you even bringing this up to us? Let me zoom in a little bit closer, because you'll see that the proportion of folks receiving or the amount of scholarship they're receiving, the bell curve is moved up significantly. So in the case of Notre Dame, it was 54% are receiving of enrolling students at Notre Dame Law are receiving somewhere between 1 and 50% of tuition on their scholarship. At WashU, that's only 15%. Instead, 58% of WashU law students are receiving a scholarship somewhere between half to full tuition. 21% are receiving either full tuition scholarships or more than full tuition scholarships. 1 in 5 students enrolled at WashU. And the 50th percentile grant amount is $48,000. The 25th percentile amount is $40,000. So now, admittedly, scholarship budgets and strategy can change every year. But as prospective students, you can look at this information and say, okay, WashU is typically ranked higher than Notre Dame. Logically, I may assume that the higher the rank the school, the less scholarship that they will provide to recruit their incoming 1L class. But actually, this information tells you something different. Notre Dame offers this, WashU offers this, plus, what was that? 50% plus, a little over 50% to enroll their 1L class. So that's all well and good. And we kind of, pivoting to this final point, how to use these documents, I kind of started mentioning this to you already. As an upcoming applicant, this is really great information just to set the table for you. Okay, so to be able to compile the same information for every school in the same place, medians, number of applicants, number of admitted students. Oh, hey, this is a school that typically enrolls a lot of students from outside the applicant pool, meaning like a junior deferral program. So let me just file that away. Or, hey, this is a school that's my dream school. And by the way, gosh, they enroll a lot of transfer students. So let me just file that away. Obviously I want to come in as a 1L, but if things don't work out for me this year, maybe this is something I can keep in mind for the future. And I can see what the median GPA was for the incoming transfer students. So I know whatever law school I go to, that's probably a good number for me to shoot for to be competitive as a transfer student. Okay, but this is for upcoming applicants. As a current applicant, how can you use this information? I mean, this is all last year's stuff, but it is useful at least to know here are the final numbers for last year. Here are the number of enrolling students. Did some of my schools enroll more students than usual last year? So maybe they're going to try to have a smaller class this year. Or what they do with their stats. as we've been tracking on the podcast and on our weekly blog, schools really tried to boost their medians last year. So you just want to make sure that as you're trying to figure out, especially now around the new year, if you're trying to figure out another reach school, another target school, another safety school, now you have the final stats to let you know how your numbers compare with the numbers for this school for this most recent enrolling class. But also, looking ahead, scholarships are going to start coming out pretty soon for a lot of the top schools. And again, scholarship budgets change from one year to the next, but this at least lets you know, okay, here's what happened last year, and this gives me a ballpark sense of what to look forward to this year. But now, for trends for this year, the best places to look are websites like Law School Data, or obviously our own blog and podcast, because we track those for the blog on a weekly basis, and on the podcast, that's part of our headlines. And then also on that note, I want to make sure to mention this. So historically, a lot of consumers used U.S. News rankings and the information that they would publish to really determine the schools they would apply to. That changed about 3-4 years ago, where a lot of law schools stopped providing information to U.S. News. And that was, you can go back into our blog archives to read all about that drama. It was an interesting time to be in the law school admissions world. But a lot of the argument from a lot of law schools was, hey, why provide this information to U.S. News when we're already providing it for free over here? Why direct people towards this publication that's here really to make money? But, you know, they're also doing some consumer education. But heck, we're doing the consumer education over here for free. Okay, so we want to make sure that we make you aware of this and we help you break this down a little bit. But also, we want to recognize, just kind of on an ending note, we went through a lot of numbers just now. Medians, applications, race, gender, 1L enrollment, 2L enrollment, scholarships. That's a whole lot, guys. That can give the impression that it's a 100% numbers game. It kind of is. It sort of is, but it's not 100% that way. So there is that statistical element to matters. Schools are cognizant of they want to enroll the best class possible, and part of that is going to be LSAT, GPA. Those are predictors for your law school GPA, not 100% perfect predictors, but hey, they are what they are. But for your reach schools, does that mean if you aren't at one of their most recently published medians that you have no shot? And that's absolutely not. You got a shot, because that's where all the softs come into play. Your resume, your personal statement, your supplemental statements. And so what we really want you to remember is there are numbers, but there's also that non-statistical element to things. And for the numbers, check out the ABA reports. That's the gospel. For the non-statistical element, just have faith. Those will also be a really important component of your application. And also, obviously, soft plug for 7Sage, nudge, nudge. This is where our work can come into play, and all the resources that we have available on our website, this podcast, our blog, and all of that. Okay, everyone, but hey, let's wrap that up, because that was a lot of numbers, a lot of time. So we'll conclude today's episode. But we hope that this was a really useful breakdown of the ABA's 509 reports, the data they contain, and how to use them for fun, hopefully for profit too. And for you, our audience, thanks for listening and for watching. And until next time, we wish you all the best on your law school applications.